This video goes into a little more detail about integrating source material. I assume you have already watched the good research writing video about how to synthesize material from your sources. That one gives the big picture of how sources should be used to support your argument and what kind of commentary you need to make about them. In this video, we're looking at the same sample paragraph, but going into some of the technical details about how to integrate that material and cite it. Okay. I hope you remember from the Howard article that we looked at earlier in the semester that most of the source material you use should be summarized. Main ideas from the sources should be put into your own words as you condense the point. Sometimes paraphrase is needed, rewording but not condensing the ideas. And quotations, the direct wording from a source, is most rarely used in academic writing. It's used most often in the humanities. In the sciences, it almost never occurs. The social sciences lie somewhere in between in terms of their tendency to quote. But even if your discipline is in the humanities, don't quote out of laziness. Make sure the direct wording is really needed. Summary is the main form of source integration within academia because it can get more ideas across in fewer words because of the condensing of ideas. Okay. Usually direct wording is used when the writer wants to analyze those words and dig deeper into their meaning. If just the ideas matter and you don't lose anything by changing the wording, you'll probably want to summarize to get the main point across quickly. And you'll notice in this paragraph, Katie Ferry rarely uses direct wording that you can see indicated by quotation marks. She has some of that. Okay, you can see a chunk here and some quotation from Barry Carneal. Okay, so that's when she wanted to get that particular phrasing across and thought it was important for the point. Okay, so when that direct wording is used, it's always led into so that your reader knows who's saying these words. Okay, so in this case, she gives us the name of a particular person and explains who he is before she goes into that quotation. And even if you're quoting a full sentence and not just part of a sentence like she worked in here, you'll want to introduce it. You'll want to say something like, Barry Carneal, president and CEO of URAC, says, comma or colon, and then introduce, work into that quotation. Don't just let the quotation stand there without a nice introduction of who is saying this. Okay, that is called a freestanding quotation or a dropped quotation, and it's really annoying to readers. And if you think of it like a conversation you're facilitating between your reader and these sources whom your reader hasn't met yet, think about this as an introducing who's talking and letting your reader know what's going on here. Why should they be listening to what this person says? Because you know who this person is because you have read this source material. The reader doesn't have that same background. Okay, and sometimes you might not just use the name and the identification about this person, like professor at such and such. Maybe that's not really relevant, but you want to say that this was a study conducted by, or a study about such and such. And so you might say that in a study conducted by, or maybe just in a study about. Then that's a good way to introduce that material too. But you'll always want to let your reader know, even though you've got information at the end of your citation, you still want to give them a heads up of some kind at the beginning to let them know where does this quoted or summarized material come from. Okay. Now let's look at the in-text citations. That are those are the little things in parentheses here. All right. And this writer was using APA format, so that's what this is going to look like to you. MLA is going to be a little bit different, but it's the ideas are the same about where you need to put this information. Okay, and I'll let you know what some of the differences are, but you'll want to look those up particularly in your handbook. All right, so basically what you want to do is, or what you want to remember is that anytime in APA when the writers of a study are mentioned, immediately after the year is inserted there. And if this is in the sentence that's introducing the point, then you do it in parentheses right after the author's name, and then at the end of your quotation or your paraphrase, you have another parentheses that gives the page number. Okay? The same principle would work with MLA, only they don't do the year of publication for the source, and they don't do that little P there. Okay? So this is, just glancing at this should let you know this is APA because of those little practices that they have there. Okay. Sometimes the person that you quote is not the author of the piece. Okay, so in the case of this Barry Carneal, who is this president of URAC, if your reader went to the works cited page and looked up Carneal, they're not going to find anything because that's not the author of the piece. That's just someone who was quoted in the piece. This piece doesn't have an author, so the title is used instead in parentheses. And when you're telling your reader, don't waste your time looking for Carneal on that works cited page on your reference sheet because you're not going to find it, you use this little phrase, as cited in, for APA, that lets the reader know, okay, this is where you're going to look to find this Carneal quote. If you want to look it up, you're going to look in this source on my bibliography or reference page. Okay, it's a little different for MLA. It's quoted in, abbreviated QTD, but it's the same idea. Okay, so that's called an indirect quote if you have to look it up, or an indirect source. Okay. One other peculiarity that you'll need to think about as you're citing and learn how to use correctly is an abbreviation called Atall. If you have multiple authors on the piece, Atall means and others in Latin, and it's used as a kind of shorthand to keep the writer from having to write out a long list of names. If there are only two authors' names, then you always put those two in parentheses as part of your citation, and they both show up on the reference page as well. When you have 3 or more for MLA, then Atall kicks in. And for APA, it's more confusing because there's a different number of authors needed to let you know you use Atall, whether it is in the citation within the paper. You're going to have 6 or more before you use Atall for the first mention. Then there's a different number about letting you know when you use Atall on the reference page or in subsequent mentions within a paper. So sometimes you have to list 4 or more people in the paper the first time, but then you could use Atall. All that stuff it's kind of confusing, so you'll need to look that up. Okay. One more thing I want to draw your attention to. This was mentioned in the Good Research Writing video, but I wanted to let you notice here that sometimes you're going to summarize a piece of information that was found in multiple sources. Research writers do this all the time to show that, okay, I've got lots of corroboration to back up this statement. And when that happens, you can list multiple sources in the same parentheses, separated by semicolons, or sometimes in MLA it'll be commas. And that way, your reader knows that this same summarized piece of information can be found in all these places, and so this gives a little more weight to that citation. It lets you know, oh, all these people say this, and it also saves you from having to use 3 different sentences to cite these people when they're essentially saying the same thing. So it saves you some time and hassle there too. So that's another handy thing to know and keep in mind. All right, folks. There are a lot of little technicalities that can be difficult to get a handle on when you're citing. So it's really good to keep in mind that keep looking things up in your textbook. You're not going to remember all the little specific details. Nobody does remember them all. That's why those handbooks are there, and that's why people are used to looking them up. The things that you use most often, you'll get to memorize. But the other things, just realize you're going to need to look them up, especially until you get familiar with them, and that's fine. That's a good practice to get into to make sure you're doing it the right way. Okay? All right.